While dark tourism can be evidenced back hundreds of years, it wasn't defined until the 1990s. At that time, it was defined as the representation of inhumane acts and how these are interpreted for the visitor. The reason for such a negative outlook may have been due to the satanic panic amongst parents and the religious that was occurring around the world during the 1980s and 90s, when metal music was leading kids towards the devil and shooting up schools. It also led to many conspiracy theories that still go on today. So there was more than a little bias at the time. But step into the 2000s and these academics seem to have come back into the light and are now seeing things a bit more clearly. And I assume the rest fell into QAnon, never to be seen again. Anyways, nowadays it is accepted that dark tourism is more historic interest than sign of demonic possession. In this video, we are looking in depth at the definition of dark tourism, whether it is ethical or not, and listing a few examples of such places. Please like, share and subscribe to help out the channel. Now let's talk dark tourism. Dark tourism, also known as thanatourism, has been defined as tourism involving travel to places historically associated with death and tragedy. More recently, it was suggested that the concept should also include the reasons tourists visit the site, which plays a big factor in the later ethical question. The main attraction to dark locations is their historical value rather than their association with death and suffering alone. There is a huge spectrum about what constitutes a dark tourist site. On one side are cemeteries and many museums, and way on the other side are those that are still being created, shall we say, such as Japan's suicide forest and Ukraine's current war zone. Again, this spectrum plays a big part in the ethical question. The definition of dark tourism can be broken down even further into subcategories, which are numerous and include grave tourism, disaster tourism, battlefield tourism, slum tourism, and heritage tourism. But what sort of sites might you see under this term? Well, to name just a few, cemeteries, ossuaries, exhibitions, museums, dark fun factories, dungeons, conflict sites, natural or man-made disaster sites, genocide sites, haunted houses, and slum locations. Most people who have travelled somewhere will have visited at least one type of these sites without even knowing. The question that has bugged academics for decades. As we said earlier, people have always visited dark sites. In our previous video about the Paris catacombs, we mentioned how people were already booking private viewing times to visit them, long before they were open to the public. So simply visiting a dark site doesn't make you a bad person, as some parts of the media and religious groups would have you believe. Humans have always been curious creatures. The short answer to the ethical question is that some parts of dark tourism can certainly be ethical and other parts very much not. To elaborate, how ethical it is to be at a site depends on three main criteria: the visitor's reason for being there, how long it's been since the site came to be, and the perspective of the locals. History has a lot of death in it, and if you're a big history buff and want to go out and explore it in a more interactive way than simply reading about it, then you will inevitably visit some of these sites. Your reason to be there is to learn and experience and come to a better understanding. This is an ethical reason to visit. However, if you're one of these bellends, your reason for being there is clearly not ethical, and you should really take a good look at yourself. And by that I mean in therapy, not in a mirror. A lot of modern day dark sites have to do with the two world wars and the various revolutions that took place in the 1900s. Generally speaking, it is ethical to visit these places. There are many decades between us and these events, and while yes, some of the people that experienced them are still alive, much time has passed. What is unethical is visiting places that are still in the middle of turmoil. War zones, disaster zones, North Korea, and as stated earlier, Japan's Okigahara forest, or at least certain parts of it anyway. In fact, during the first week after the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, there were reports of influencers in the disaster zone taking happy snaps. Less than a week. They were still pulling out survivors during this time while these bellends were using the local suffering for a photo shoot. That's some top level narcissism right there. So yes, timing is important. What's also important is the local people and local authorities' perspective on the matter. If they have set up viewing points or information boards or made it accessible depending on the type of site, then it is likely that your visiting is ethical. They provided you with information and viewing access for this purpose. Likewise, if the site appears on an official tourism website or has an official website on its own, you're likely in the clear. However, if you need to bribe someone to take you there, you're likely going to be arrested by being there, or the locals are pissed off that you're gawking at their situation. Check yourself. Say you're off on your next trip and you're thinking about visiting a few of these sites, but you're not really sure of the do's and don'ts. Now, I'm not an expert, but I have visited a lot of places that would count as dark tourism. So here are my thoughts. Do your research into the event or the site's history before you go, and then learn while you're there. This is the part that I very much enjoy. Don't specifically go to gawk at people or places. Think about your purpose of being there. Don't visit somewhere just because you saw it on a dark tourism list. Don't go to get clout on social media. People's suffering is not there for you to get likes. And it's sad that that has to be said out loud. Careful where you point that camera. Happy selfie snaps at a dark site is generally distasteful. Also, there may be rules or even laws about photographing certain areas, so be aware. Be respectful of the site, the locals, and the history, and follow all rules given. Don't vandalize and steal from the site. You would think that would be obvious, but no. Don't wear disrespectful clothing. I know we're in a time where people stamp their little feet claiming they can wear whatever they want whenever, but no, just no. Time and place, people. Don't talk loudly or make inappropriate remarks. In general, just don't be a bellend. If you can't handle yourself respectfully at a place like that, stay home. Yeah, it's very simple. So I'm going to show you 10 different examples of dark tourism sites that are considered to be on the more ethical side because of time and local perspective. Your reason for being there and how you act can certainly change that. And I'll put all the official links to these areas in the description. When you think of dark tourism, you think of Auschwitz. But remember a few moments ago when I said you shouldn't be going somewhere simply because you saw it on a list somewhere? Well, millions of people visit this site without the term dark tourism ringing in their heads. They have a more heartfelt and educational reason for being there, and that is what makes it ethical. The memorial and museum opened in 1955, and they have a very comprehensive website about the site's history, its exhibitions, and how to prepare for your visit. And remember how I said about following rules? Well, they make it very clear to you. For example, visitors to the grounds of the museum should behave with due solemnity and respect. Visitors are obliged to dress in a manner befitting of a place of this nature. The fact that certain individuals can't wrap their little minds around that just fills me with rage. The Rwandan genocide saw around 800,000 civilians massacred by their fellow countrymen in just over 3 months in 1994. For me, this is the site that I feel the strongest need to visit at some point in my life just to pay my respects. There are many memorials spread around Rwanda, but the memorial in the capital is perhaps the main one and certainly the easiest to visit. The site is a comprehensive museum and also a memorial site with a mass grave of over 250,000 victims, with more added every year as they're found throughout the country. The bridge on the River Kwai is found on the border between Thailand and Myanmar and was built along with the railroad during World War II by POWs under Japanese occupation. You can still visit the bridge itself, and the Thailand-Burma Railroad Centre is a great museum to accompany that. They can also provide you with the following, which would make for a highly ethical visit. With extensive knowledge of the Thailand-Burma Railway, TBRC is proud to offer a selection of tours related to the location and construction of the railway, prison camp sites, etc. These tours are not scheduled and conducted to a timetable, but rather personally planned and tailored to suit individual needs. They are ideal for those with family connections to ex-POW railway workers or others seeking a deep personal understanding of what it took to construct 415 kilometres of railway, almost totally by hand, under incredibly difficult conditions over 60 years ago. We are not a tour company for normal tourist activities such as sightseeing, elephant trekking and the like, but we specialise in railway history, personal pilgrimages and behind-the-scenes insight into this historic wartime event. Pompeii really is the definition of dark tourism site, but many people forget that even though thousands of people died here. The site is also huge, and it can take quite a while to look around, but you're going to get your money's worth. They have spent a lot of time and consideration adapting the site to enable everyone to be able to access as much of it as possible, so check out their website for details. It is truly incredible what they have been able to do. There are multiple archaeological dig areas and museums for you to explore, and I know many people who have highly recommend visiting. Port Arthur is a dark tourism site for not one but two reasons, which all of us Aussies will be aware of. It was a penal colony in the 1800s, and then for the mass shooting that occurred in 1996, which resulted in 35 dead. The site includes more than 30 historic buildings, ruins, restored houses, heritage gardens and walking trails. You can explore alone, or there are many different tours offered for a more in-depth look. It is a very popular place for school excursions during the week, so if you want to visit during a quieter time, it is a very good idea to call ahead. Villa Grimaldi, officially the Terra Nova Barracks, was the centre of kidnapping, torture and extermination, and later as a place of memory, linked to the violation of human rights perpetrated by the agents of the state during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet during 1973 to 1990. The site opened for the first time to the community in December 10, 1994, and later the Park of Peace was built in 1997. The entire site is divided into 4 distinct areas: an area for conservation and maintenance of the park, for documentary archives, for oral archives, and the documentation centre. It is all very easy to visit via public transport, and there is no entry fee. The Cape Coast Castle Museum aims to educate its visitors about the arrival of Europeans to Africa and their interactions with the local communities and the central region in general. Visitors can view maps of the slave trade routes and look at examples of objects which were traded for slaves. You can visit alone, or there is a 45-minute guided tour which allows visitors to view the castle's dungeon, the condemned cell, and the door of no return. I only know one person personally who has visited this museum, but they did say you should really opt in for the tour because you get so much more out of your visit. Not going to lie, this is certainly one of the more expensive dark tourism sites, but it is a large area. The site comprises of a memorial section, which is free to visit, and the museum section that is paid. There are many rules and regulations for visiting this site, so I would strongly recommend you visiting their website and making sure you're okay with abiding by all of them before you turn up. Obviously, because it's in the middle of the city, it's very easy to visit via public transport. From Tillamook Bay to the Oregon coast to Cape Scott Provincial Park on Vancouver Island stretches the deadly coastal region known as the Graveyard of the Pacific. Thick fog banks, strong currents and waves and powerful winds have been the downfall of many ships since exploration began in the 15th century. There are many ways you can visit this area. There is a large exhibit at the Columbia Pacific Heritage Museum, but if you're feeling a bit more adventurous, there are many walking trails along the coast with signage pointing out to where the known shipwrecks are. The link in the description has a great map outlining all of this, so if you're looking to stretch your legs and get outside for a while, this site may be for you. Armero was a small town in Colombia about 160 kilometers north of Bogota that was decimated by a huge volcanic eruption in 1985, and it killed over 25,000 people. The tragedy was encapsulated by one person, Amara Sanchez, the 13-year-old girl that was trapped in the debris, unable to move, and despite efforts, she was to die there 3 days later, succumbing from her injuries. The central area is now one of remembrance, called the Park of Life, and the area was later to be declared Holy Land by Pope John Paul II. The local authorities' website states that you should feel free to walk through the area and view the amount of devastation caused. Close by to the site is where the surviving locals rebuilt their town. Here there is a monument to the dead and a large cemetery which holds many of the victims. Unfortunately, this cemetery has had an issue with grave robbing, so be prepared for that. Many locals are happy to offer tours of the area, with many of them actually having been there when the eruption occurred. Which dark tourist site have you visited? And what do you think about the ethical debate? Let us know in the comments. I know I certainly have a very definite line, and often just because you want to go somewhere doesn't mean you should. If you enjoyed this video, may I suggest checking out our other video, Death as a Source of Entertainment, which I'll link below. Moral of the story, show respect and think hard about why you're choosing to visit these sites. And with that, go talk death.